Welcome to Mr. News Art Class. It's wonderful to see your smiling faces. In recent lessons, we have talked about using geometric shapes to create landmarks like buildings and organic shapes to make more natural landmarks like an orange tree. In those lessons, we were focused on just one thing at a time for each of those lessons. Our last lesson was about sunsets, and even though we included multiple things in that picture, it was still very flat. It only had one layer. In today's lesson, we're going to talk about overlapping lots of layers. Let's get started. Today we're going to be learning about a famous artist named Henri Rousseau. It's going to be a bunch of fun. We have 3 goals for today. Number 1, we want to make sure we remember everything we learned last week about overlapping, about organic shapes. Number 2, we want to see how a famous artist, Henri Rousseau, used those 2 things. And number 3, we want to use lots and lots and lots of layers of overlapping to create an actual whole scene, because last week we just made like one branch with some stuff on. We want to actually have like a whole scene here instead of just one tree, one branch. Let's take a look and see how that's going to happen. So for starters, let's look at last week's picture and let's remember that we had organic shapes, no straight lines at all. Even our branches were wobbly, wonky, bajankety, jagged, bumpy. No straight line. Even our circles weren't perfect circles. They were kind of squashed and lumpy, and that's what nature looks like. And as we make a nature scene today, we want to keep those things in mind. Speaking of making a nature scene, here's one from Henri Rousseau. Notice there's a tiger in there that's like scared of the storm, but that's not what I really want you to see right now. What I really want you to see is the layers of overlapping. Notice that there's like grass and other plants in front of the tiger. There's also trees and bushes and other plants behind the tiger. There's a lot of layers going back. Here's another example in which we've got some cute little monkeys eating oranges. But there's some plants in front, some tall grass in front of those monkeys, covering up their legs and feet. And then there's other plants behind them, like trees. And then there's other plants behind those trees, like more trees behind those trees, and then more trees behind the trees behind the trees. You get what I'm saying. And this is one of my absolute favorite Henri Rousseau paintings. It is called The Tiger Riding Ukulele Man, for obvious reasons, because there's a man riding a tiger playing a ukulele. And if you look super close, you might even see that there's a lion overlapping behind some of the tall grass and flowers, and he's ready to pounce. But just look at all the layers with the tiger and the man's leg in front of the tiger and the other leg on the other side of the tiger. And then there's flowers, and then there's trees, and then there's leaves, and then there's grass, and so many different layers. And there's just a tiny little bit of the blue sky showing at the top. Now, Henri Rousseau was a self-taught artist. That means he didn't have an art teacher like Mr. New teaching him how to do these things. He learned it all on his own by just doing it. And that's really cool. But also, another important fact about him is that he was an amateur painter. He didn't paint for money. He wasn't a professional. He didn't do it as his job. His job was just a regular old day job. He worked at a menagerie, the Paris Menagerie, which is basically like a combination of a zoo and a botanical garden. And on his days off, when he wasn't working, he would take his painting supplies to the zoo and just paint the plants and animals that he saw there. And he would put together a lot of weird things that don't usually get put together in real life. Like, you know, if you've ever been to a zoo, you know, they've got like the lion den as one habitat. And that lion den has the lions, but it also has the plants and other things that a lion, you know, would live around. Then you go over here and you got the monkey cage, and you've got the trees that the monkeys would climb in, and the other plants that the monkeys eat and things like that. Then you come over here and you've got the pond area where you've got the fish, and you've got the seaweed type things and the algae and all the plants that grow in the water. the lilies and stuff. And you got the different plants from different areas. You got different animals in different areas. Well, here in this painting by Henri Rousseau, you see plants from multiple different habitats. You see animals from multiple different habitats all coming together into this one weird, silly dream. That's exactly what Henri Rousseau was after. He created what he called dreamscapes, and his dreamscapes are like a landscape, a picture of land, except that they're supposed to be fanciful, places that would only be able to exist in your imagination, because he just built them as he went based on, I think this would look cool here. So that's our goal for today. We're not trying to make a desert, we're not trying to make a jungle, we're not trying to make the beach. We're trying to mash a whole bunch of different types of things together to make one picture of a place that really could only exist in our imagination. And in doing so, we want to use lots of organic shapes and lots of layers of overlapping. So to make that happen, I am flipping to a new page, and you notice here that I have folded this paper in half. Why did I do that? Well, here's why. Because if we're making a bunch of layers of overlapping, this could take a long time. The smaller your paper is, the less time it's going to take. So in the interest of saving some time, I've folded my paper in half. I'm only going to use half of a sheet of paper. Also, in the interest of saving some time, I will not be using a pencil on this picture. I'm not going to draw it first and then go back to color it. I'm just going to jump right in with my colors, so I only have to draw it once. That also means I'm not going to be erasing anything, because you can't erase crayons. And that saves some time too. I could use colored pencils for this drawing, and if I did, colored pencils are sharpened quite pointy, and they can get really tiny details, which can be great for this project. But it takes more time. If you've got the time and you want to do it, great, use the colored pencils, that would be great. But if you're trying to save some time, switch to crayons instead. And markers are going to be pretty much a no-no for this. Markers are, well, see, the problem with markers is that if you draw something and then you try to color right next to it, it smears across the page and it's ugly, and markers aren't going to work too great for us. So crayons it is. I have already chosen out most of the crayons that I'm going to use. I'm using mostly greens. And now, if you think about the color green, it's a mixture really of two other colors, right? It's a mixture of blue and yellow. Now I got out several different greens and yellows and blues that I think I can blend together in some interesting ways. We'll talk about blending colors here in just a bit. I also got some neutral colors to go with them, because rocks might be gray, tree bark might be gray or brown. Black and white are always good to have on hand just in case. I probably won't use them very much, but anyway, I'm gonna use these crayons to go ahead and get started. I might just start with a basic green because I'm drawing some plants, right? And when I start, I want to start at the bottom of my page, and I want to start really big. Why should I start at the bottom of my page? Well, I'm starting with things that are close to me, and when things are really close to me, they look bigger, right? And also when things are really close to me, they're going to look like they're farther down on the page. So that's why I'm starting at the bottom of the page, and that's why I'm starting big. I'm going to start with some big leafy type things. I don't know, I'm making it up as I go. These don't even have to be real plants. So there is a big ginormous leafy shape. Notice I have drawn that with my green, but I don't necessarily just want to color it with this crayon, because there's going to be a whole lot of green, and if I just color everything all with the same green, it's going to be like I just colored the whole page green, and then that's not what I want. So it's time to really jump into understanding how to blend colors. Okay? I know this is going to be a little bit tricky. I know that some of you are going to struggle with it. I know that some of you are going to be like, I don't get it. How do you do that? Just try. Just do your best. Draw a leaf. And let's try together. First thing I'm going to do is, instead of holding it like a pencil, like my kindergarten teacher taught me how to hold a pencil really close to the tip so I could push down really hard, no, I'm going to hold it further back. And I'm not going to point it down and push. I'm going to just let gravity drop it onto the page. You know, just drop it. And I'm just going to wiggle it. I'm just going to wiggle it. I'm not pushing down at all. I'm just wiggling it. It's kind of sideways on the page, and I'm just kind of wiggling it. And you notice that it's not very dark, is it? That's a good thing. Because what I'm trying to do here is blend some colors together. And in order to do that, I need to have several layers of light colors blending together. So I've colored that thing green. And I'm going to use this blue-green to make a dark side of the leaf. Again, I'm holding it kind of sideways and just wiggling it. I'm not really pushing down. I'm going to let this side of the leaf be darker, and I'm just using some of that blue-green to make that side darker. While I'm at it, I'm kind of looking at the leaf as two different sections. It's got this line down the middle, and I'm going to put a little bit of a shadow on this side of the leaf as well. Then I'm going to switch to my lighter green, like a yellow green, and I'm going to kind of go over the opposite side with that. And you see how that's blending with the green that was already there and just making it a little brighter. And then I can come back to the green that I started with and kind of go over all of it. And you see how it sort of blends together. I'm pushing a little bit now, but still not super hard. But it just blends those colors together into a nice, beautiful green leaf. Looks like a light shining on that green leaf. See how it looks like there's a light shining onto this side of the leaf because I put the lighter green there? I put the yellow green there? Huh. Now, if I use that process for all of my leaves and all of my grass and all of my different things that I draw, there's going to be enough contrast between different parts of different leaves and different grass and different things that individual pieces will stand out, right? So I'm going to draw another leaf, kind of overlapped behind this one, pointing the other way. Again, since I'm down close at the bottom of the picture, which is really close to me, it's going to be pretty big. And again, I'm going to color the whole thing in lightly with this regular green. And then for the shadow, if you don't have a blue-green, you could use just a blue. This one says bluetiful, bluetiful. Ah, so funny, bluetiful. Well, I thought it was funny. Okay. And if you don't have a bright yellow-green, you could just use a yellow, right? So you could even do this with your colored pencils if that's what you're using, but remember, it'll just be a little quicker if we use the crayons. They do color quite a bit quicker than colored pencils do. And I'm just kind of blending those colors together so that I have the shadowed side, the dark side is bluer, and then the highlighted side, the side that the light is shining onto, is lighter. And then go back over the whole thing again and blend those colors into each other with my regular green again. And then if I want, I could use my black or my brown to put a shadow where things overlap. I think the black is probably going to be too dark for that, so I'm just going to use a brown to just put a little bit of a shadow where one thing overlaps another. Huh, that's a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. It does take time, but it's not really hard. Let's do it again. Let's make another leaf. Let's make another leaf that goes this way this time. And whoa, I did like 3 more leaves there. Oh, let's get the shadows in there. Now, all of these leaves were colored the same way because they're all part of the same plant, which means, you know, if this is all just one plant, I need some variety in here, right? Because remember, I'm not trying to just draw one plant. That's what we did last week, is we drew one plant. I'm trying to draw a whole scene. I need to have other plants overlapping here. So when I start drawing a different plant, I need to draw it a different way. I mean, that sounds like a no duh, but if I start using the same color it green and then use the blue green and the yellow green to make the shadow and highlight, and then go back to and then use the brown for the shadow on it, if I do it that way, it's gonna look the same. So maybe for my next plant, instead of using the regular green as my base color, I'll use the yellow-green as my base color. I'll use a yellow-yellow for the highlights. I'll use the green for the shadows. Let me show you what I mean. So here, maybe I'm gonna have a plant, a different kind of plant. Maybe it's gonna be like a long stem, and then that stem is going to have a bunch of leaves coming off of it. Now this is overlapping behind. So like this leaf goes way back here behind that one. This one goes over here. This one goes over here. This one goes over here, over here, over here, back and forth, back and forth. And then maybe one more leaf at the end, okay? And notice, since I'm gonna be using this yellow-green instead of the green-green as my base color, I'm gonna go ahead and color all of those leaves lightly and gently, not pushing down, lightly and gently with this yellow-green. And then I'm gonna come to my regular green for the dark side of each leaf, and just make a little bit darker on one side of each leaf. And then I'm going to use my bright yellow, and I'm actually pushing hard with my yellow here to make the highlight, the bright shiny spot on the top of each leaf. And it's gonna, this whole plant, because I started with the base color being that light green, that yellow green, instead of the regular darker green, this whole plant is gonna look lighter because I've shifted all of my colors. Now, when I go back over and blend those together, I'm using not my dark green, my regular green, I'm using that yellow green, the one I started with, to blend those colors together. Oh yeah, you know, I should probably also add a little bit of a dark shadow on one side of the stem and a little bit of a highlight on the other side of the stem. Do that too. And then come back and, you know, finish it off by blending those colors together with my yellow-green. Now, I'm trying to think about how I'm going to handle my overlapping shadows. I think the brown is probably going to be too dark. Since this is so much lighter, I'm going to use the gray for my shadows instead, for the cast shadows, like where this plant, this leaf is casting a shadow onto the plant behind it, and where like two leaves overlapping, one's going to drop a shadow onto the one under it. So there's going to be little bits of shadow here. And, you know, this step is not 100% necessary, but it really does just give a little bit of extra definition there to the things, to the plants. So I like to do it. Anyway, those are the steps. Each time you start a new plant, make sure you put it behind the ones you've already done. Make sure you use a different coloring scheme. And, you know, flowers are great because they could be lots of different colors, right? They could be pink, they could be purple, they could be orange, they could be yellow, they could be bright, whatever. Leaves usually would be some kind of green. I guess they could be yellow or orange or red if you're drawing a fall picture. But it would depend on the type of leaf, right? You know, some plants have their leaves change colors and others don't. So that would be up to you to decide. I'm gonna just finish up this picture and show you what it looks like when it's done. Okay, so this is not quite done yet, but notice how I've got a couple different layers of overlapping, and I'm starting to get really tiny spaces that it's like, how do I draw something else behind there? When I get to this point where all of my little spaces are just really tiny, well, at this point I can just start making tree trunks. So like I could, you know, a tree trunk is going to be kind of rectangular, but maybe a little bumpy, right? It's not going to be a perfect rectangle. So I'm just kind of, you know, I bump and I jump, and I'm just kind of trying to make, you know, a not quite straight line that goes behind all of my plants. And then I can color in that space between those two lines with the brown, you know, because that trunk has some thickness. It's not just going to be one line, right? Notice again, just like everything before, I'm starting light. I can go back and add more, you know, different variations of colors to this. I will probably use gray and maybe black to add some definition, some texture, you know, because like tree trunks have bark that's got some bumpy texture to it. So what I'm doing here is I'm going back and using the black to add some bumps onto that tree trunk. Maybe darken up one side a little bit more, right? Because we've been talking about shadows. And then maybe the other side, I'll use a yellow to make it look like the sun is shining on that side. Something like that, right? And if that's a tree trunk, then, you know, obviously that's farther away because these are like leaves that are bigger than the tree trunk. Well, no, it's not bigger than, it's just the tree trunk is farther away. Maybe there's like, you know, you see the underside of a tree canopy up at the top, right? Where you just see like not the whole tree, not all the leaves on the tree, but just, you know, just a little bit at the top of your page. And I can do a couple more of those. So there, now you might be thinking, but I still have these gaps. Should I leave them white? No. In those places, you'll see the sky through in between. So now we've talked before many times, including today, about the difference between pushing hard with your crayon or being soft and gentle with your crayon. Which one of those looks more like sky blue? When I push down hard to make it dark, or when I'm soft and gentle and make it light? The lighter color looks more like sky blue. So if you have a sky blue crayon, or you might have like a sky blue colored pencil, you could use that. Even if you've drawn the rest with crayon, you could jump to your colored pencil for that. But I'm gonna make it simple by just using this. This is even the blue-green. And I'm just being very gentle, and I'm just gonna go color all the gaps, anywhere where I still see white, anything at all, even if it's a tiny little itty bitty little space. I'm just gonna very gently fill those in with a light blue. Now let's count how many layers I've made.
First, I have this plant, and I could count the individual layers of the leaves, but I'm just going to count that as one big bushy plant. That is in front of this plant, so that's a second layer. That plant is in front of the flower, that's a third layer. And then all of those things are in front of the trees, which is a fourth layer. And then the trees are in front of the sky, which is a fifth layer. So I have 5 layers of overlapping in this picture. The more the merrier. Push it however you can push it. Make as many layers of overlapping as you can.
In this lesson, we basically did the same thing as we did in our lesson about orange trees with oranges on a branch. We talked about nature, we talked about organic shapes, we talked about overlapping, we talked about color mixing and shading. But today we pushed that to the next level by having lots of layers, not just within one plant, but another plant behind another plant behind another plant, until we filled up the entire page to make a jungle dreamscape. Overlapping with lots of layers is a great way to create depth or distance in your pictures. It gives the illusion that your picture is three-dimensional and has a space to it. In the next lesson, we're going to jump into the basics of one-point perspective, which is a way to create that illusion of space, but without it feeling cramped, like this overlapping picture looks cramped. I can't wait to see you then.